Tensions between Ukraine and Russia have persisted since the Soviet Union dissolved in 1991. Ukraine, historically dubbed the breadbasket of Soviet Russia, has continued to be of significant political, military, and economic relevance to Russia. The roots of the ongoing dispute over Ukraine's sovereignty are deeply embedded in the region's history, a narrative that spans over a millennium. For much of that history, Ukraine did not exist as an independent nation. Therefore, the term Ukraine here refers to the area surrounding Kiev, a region central to this historical account. Crimea also plays a vital role in this narrative, its past closely intertwined with the broader relationship between Russia and Ukraine. Today, Kiev serves as Ukraine's capital. 1,000 years ago, Kiev was the core of the Kievan Rus, a powerful state. From the 8th to the 11th centuries, Norse traders, mainly of Swedish descent, navigated the river routes connecting the Baltic and Black Seas. These traders reached as far as the Byzantine Empire and in the 10th century even launched attacks on Persia from the Caspian Sea. Settling around present-day Kiev, these Norsemen were called the Rus, a name likely derived from a term for rowers reflecting their association with river travel and ships. As they integrated with Slavic, Baltic, and Finnic populations, they collectively became known as the Kievan Rus. The Rus tribes are the forebears of today's Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians. By the 12th century, Kiev was celebrated as the mother of Rus cities, signifying its status as the Kievan Rus capital. The rulers of this realm bore the title Grand Princes of Kiev. Kiev's association with the early Rus heritage as the cradle of the Russian people gives the city a profound symbolic resonance beyond Ukraine's borders. It played a crucial role in Russia's origins, yet now lies outside Russian territory. This ancient connection helps explain today's tensions. Throughout history, places that hold deep significance often become flashpoints for conflict. In 1223, the Mongol horde began its conquest of the Kievan Rus, winning a decisive victory at the Battle of the Kalka River on May 31st. Though the Mongols withdrew after the battle, the devastation was lasting, and they returned in 1237 to complete their conquest, initiating the fragmentation of the Rus states and leaving the region under the Golden Horde's control for centuries. During this era, the Grand Duchy of Moscow rose to prominence, eventually becoming the nucleus of modern Russia and a new center for the Rus people. As the Golden Horde's grip weakened, Ukraine fell under the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and later the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Cossacks, closely tied to Kiev and Ukraine, resisted Polish-Lithuanian rule and sought alignment with Russia. Under the leadership of the Grand Princes of Moscow since 1371, Russia gradually unified disparate territories, a process completed by Vasily III in the 1520s. The emerging Russian state attracted the loyalty of the Rus populations in Ukraine. In 1654, the Cossacks entered the Treaty of Pereyaslav with Tsar Alexis of Russia, the second Romanov Tsar, formally pledging allegiance to Moscow and breaking with the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. The Soviet Union later framed this as a reunification of Ukraine and Russia under a single ruler. Crimea, once a Khanate and part of the Ottoman Empire, became briefly independent after conflict between the Ottomans and Russians, before being annexed by Russia in 1783 on Catherine the Great's orders, a move accepted by the Crimean Tatars and formally recognized by the Ottoman Empire. During the 19th century, a distinct Ukrainian identity began to take clearer shape, deeply connected to the legacy of the Cossacks and their resistance against imperial powers. This period saw a national awakening as Ukrainian intellectuals and cultural figures drew inspiration from Cossack traditions to define what it meant to be Ukrainian, emphasizing language, literature, and folk customs as unique markers of nationhood. At the same time, the Russian Empire regarded Ukrainians and Belarusians as subsets of the Russian people,
labeling them Little Russians and promoting the idea of a shared ethnic origin. However, this assimilationist narrative failed to fully take root, as Ukrainian writers and thinkers like Taras Shevchenko and Mykola Kostomarov fostered a sense of ethno-cultural identity distinct from Russian identity. Efforts to suppress Ukrainian separatism intensified in the 19th century. In 1804, the Russian authorities banned the teaching of Ukrainian in schools, aiming to quell the growth of a separate national consciousness and prevent the fragmentation of the empire. This policy was later expanded in 1876, extending the prohibition to Ukrainian language books, theater, and public lectures, further restricting cultural expression. The Crimean War, 1853 to 1856, brought the region into global focus as Russia fought against an alliance of the Ottoman Empire, France, and Britain. The war included notable battles such as Alma and Balaclava, the infamous charge of the Light Brigade, and the siege of Sevastopol, a strategic naval base on the Black Sea. Russia's defeat, formalized by the Treaty of Paris in 1856, barred it from stationing naval forces in the Black Sea and prompted a wave of internal reforms to modernize the empire. In the early 20th century, the Russian Revolution of 1917 briefly allowed Ukraine to declare independence, but it was soon absorbed into the Soviet Union. Ukraine and Russia were among the founding signatories of the USSR in 1922. Ukraine's fertile plains made it the breadbasket of the Soviet Union, supplying essential grain and foodstuffs. Tragically, this agricultural wealth became the backdrop for the Holodomor, a state-engineered famine under Stalin's regime that resulted in the deaths of up to 4 million Ukrainians. The Soviet government confiscated crops and livestock, exporting food abroad to finance industrial projects, while military forces prevented locals from accessing remaining supplies, leading to mass starvation. World War II brought further devastation. Nazi Germany invaded Ukraine in 1941, occupying the territory by November. The Nazis initially encouraged the idea of Ukrainian independence to gain local support, but ultimately reneged on these promises. Between 1941 and 1944, approximately 1.5 million Ukrainian Jews were murdered. The Soviet counteroffensive recaptured Kiev in late 1943, and by October 1944, Ukraine was liberated from German occupation, though at the cost of 5 to 7 million Ukrainian lives. Another famine in 1946 to 47 claimed an additional million lives, and it was not until the 1960s that agricultural production returned to pre-war levels. In 1954, the Soviet government transferred Crimea from the Russian Soviet Republic to the Ukrainian Soviet Republic, a decision that seemed inconsequential at the time but would later become a source of dispute. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster in 1986 further destabilized the region. A catastrophic reactor meltdown led to widespread contamination and a vast exclusion zone, undermining public trust in the Soviet system. Mikhail Gorbachev later described Chernobyl as a pivotal moment that weakened the Soviet Union and accelerated demands for openness and reform. With the collapse of the USSR in 1991, Ukraine became an independent state, confirmed by a referendum in which over 92% of voters supported independence. Leonid Kravchuk was elected as the country's first president. Following independence, Ukraine inherited the world's third-largest stockpile of nuclear weapons, though the operational control systems remained in Russian hands. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, Ukraine inherited the world's third-largest nuclear arsenal. In a series of negotiations, Ukraine agreed to relinquish these weapons and joined the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons as a non-nuclear state. This process culminated in the signing of the Budapest Memorandum on December 5, 1994, by Ukraine, Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. Under the terms of the memorandum,
Ukraine committed to transferring its nuclear warheads to Russia for dismantlement and destroying its remaining nuclear infrastructure. In exchange, the signatories pledged to respect Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and existing borders, and to refrain from the threat or use of force and economic coercion against Ukraine. The memorandum also provided for consultations among the signatories in the event that these commitments were challenged. Despite these assurances, the memorandum was not a legally binding treaty, but rather a diplomatic agreement, and it lacked enforcement mechanisms. This became especially significant in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea and supported armed conflict in eastern Ukraine, actions widely recognized as violations of the Budapest Memorandum's commitments to respect Ukraine's territorial integrity. The Budapest Memorandum is a key example of the challenges facing international security guarantees, particularly when signatories violate their commitments and there are no binding enforcement provisions. The events in Ukraine since 2014 have brought renewed scrutiny to the effectiveness of such security assurances and have had lasting implications for global non-proliferation and the security of non-nuclear states. Thank you for watching. Subscribe, like, share, and see you in our next video.